Now, Tanzania's economy is growing rapidly, projected to expand by 6% this year, driven by significant infrastructure investments.
Russia just made a move in Tanzania that has Western powers absolutely panicking, and what they're offering could completely flip East Africa's entire power structure. Right now, Tanzania is facing a crisis that could destroy everything they've built. The EU just froze $156 million in aid. The US pulled another $100 million and slapped travel warnings on the country. Western banks are shutting the money taps. And Tanzania's debt is climbing towards 65% of GDP with no relief in sight. President Samia publicly admitted their global image is battered and securing funding from international institutions just became nearly impossible. This is economic warfare. And while the West lectures Tanzania about democracy and threatens more sanctions, Russia quietly walked in with something nobody expected, a full economic lifeline that doesn't come with any political strings attached. So let me show you exactly what Russia's offering, why the West is terrified, and how this one deal could reshape the entire balance of power in Africa. Here's what most people don't understand about Tanzania's situation. In October 2025, Tanzania held elections. The ruling party CCM won decisively. Opposition parties cried foul. Western election observers called it fundamentally flawed. And within weeks, the punishments started rolling in. The EU froze aid. US senators threatened sanctions. The African Union condemned the process. And suddenly, Tanzania found itself economically isolated from the West. Now, Tanzania's economy was already walking a tightrope. Public debt hit 49.6% of GDP before the crisis and climbing fast towards 65%. The country needs about 700,000 tons of fertilizer annually just to keep agriculture running. They import over 90% of it. Their infrastructure desperately needs investment. Roads, ports, power grids, gas processing facilities. And all of this requires massive capital that was supposed to come from Western aid and loans. But when the West pulls funding, everything stops. Tanzania's 2025 budget jumped 15% to $21.88 billion.
These funds have been directed towards development projects with significant national benefits, including road infrastructure, a modern railway, airports, and electricity generation projects.
Western aid historically covered about 23% of government revenue. That's billions of dollars suddenly gone. And the timing couldn't be worse because Tanzania is trying to achieve Vision 2050, a plan to become a trillion-dollar economy through infrastructure and industrialization. Without external financing, that vision dies. So what does Tanzania do? They turn east. And Russia was waiting with open arms. On October 28, 2024, something major happened that barely made Western news. Russia's Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, flew to Dar es Salaam with a full delegation. They met with Tanzania's Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa. And the very next day, October 29th, Tanzania and Russia held their first ever joint intergovernmental commission on Bonman, trade and economic cooperation at the Julius Nyerere International Convention Center. This wasn't just a diplomatic photo op. This was Russia and Tanzania sitting down to hammer out specific deals across multiple sectors: agriculture, energy, mining, infrastructure, tourism, everything Tanzania needs right now. And here's what makes this meeting absolutely critical: Russia came with real offers, not conditions, not lectures about governance, just business. Let's break down what Russia is actually offering. First, fertilizer. Tanzania needs 700,000 tons annually and imports over 90% from foreign suppliers. Russia is already supplying Tanzanian markets and they're ready to massively increase volumes. Russian Minister Reshetnikov stated clearly that Russian fertilizer producers are prepared to expand shipments significantly. And they're not just selling fertilizer, they're offering to help Tanzania with rational use of mineral fertilizers and training in advanced agronomic practices. This is huge. Agriculture employs about 65% of Tanzania's workforce. If farming productivity drops because of fertilizer shortages, the entire economy collapses. Millions go hungry. Social unrest explodes. Russia is essentially offering to keep Tanzania's agricultural sector alive while the West walks away. Second, energy. Tanzania has massive untapped natural gas reserves. We're talking enormous deposits off the coast and onshore. But they lack the technology and capital to develop them. Russia offered to increase exports of liquefied natural gas and natural gas to Tanzania. But more importantly, Russian companies are willing to work on extracting fossil fuels and implementing major pipeline projects. They're offering to help build the infrastructure Tanzania needs to become energy independent. Right now, despite having huge gas reserves, Tanzania only has 80,000 registered industries and only 57 actually use natural gas for operations. Only 5,000 vehicles run on compressed natural gas. Only 500 households are connected to piped cooking gas. Russia wants to change that. They're bringing the expertise and investment to develop Tanzania's gas sector at scale. Third, infrastructure and trade hubs. Russia sees Tanzania's strategic location on the Indian Ocean as a gateway to all of East Africa. Reshetnikov explicitly said Tanzania can serve as the sole window through which Russian products could enter the Eastern African market. Russia is interested in developing Tanzania's ports. They're looking at the deep water port project in Bagamoyo near Dar es Salaam. They're exploring upgrades to existing ports in Tanga, Imetwara, and Dar es Salaam itself, all recently modernized and capable of handling large vessels. If Russia develops these ports, they establish a permanent trade presence in East Africa. They bypass Western-controlled trade routes. They create alternative supply chains that don't touch Europe or rely on Western financial systems. This is geopolitical chess at the highest level. Fourth, direct flights and tourism. Russia announced plans to establish direct flights from Moscow to Zanzibar. This might sound small, but it's not. Tourism is one of Tanzania's biggest industries. Western tourists are pulling back because of travel advisories. Russian tourists could fill that gap. Plus, direct flights mean more business travel, more investment delegations, deeper people-to-people connections. It's soft power infrastructure. Fifth, military cooperation. Here's where it gets really interesting. Russia has signed military cooperation agreements with 33 African states as of November 2024. Tanzania is one of them. Russia signed a military cooperation agreement with Tanzania back in 2016, and they've been expanding it ever since. This includes training Tanzanian servicemen at Russian military academies, supplying defense equipment, and security cooperation. Why does this matter? Because military ties create long-term strategic relationships that are hard to break. Tanzania gets modern weapons and training without Western conditions about human rights or democracy. Russia gets a friendly military partner on the Indian Ocean with strategic ports. It's a win-win that completely bypasses Western influence. Now let's talk about the financial architecture Russia is building. In May 2025, the second meeting of the Russia-Tanzania Commission happened in St. Petersburg. By then, bilateral trade had already grown 20% since the start of 2025. Russian exports to Tanzania jumped 25%, mainly wheat, meslin, and fertilizers. Tanzania exports coffee, tea, tobacco, and fruit to Russia. And here's the key detail: Russia plans to increase the share of settlements with African countries in local currencies to 90% by 2030. Think about what that means. No dollars, no euros, just rubles and Tanzanian shillings. This completely cuts out Western banks, cuts out SWIFT, cuts out any Western ability to monitor, control, or sanction these transactions. If Russia and Tanzania trade in local currencies, the West has zero leverage. They can't freeze accounts, can't block payments, can't do anything except watch their influence evaporate. And Tanzania isn't alone in this. Russia opened trade missions in Senegal and Tanzania. They're building a regional crisis management center in Burundi. They're cooperating with Rwanda on nuclear energy. They're spreading across East Africa systematically, offering each country the same deal: trade, development, and security without Western political interference. But here's where this gets even more strategic. Tanzania isn't just accepting Russian help, they're actively pivoting away from the West. In August 2023, President Samia attended the BRICS summit in South Africa. She gave a speech calling for a fair global economic order and criticized the North-South divide. She said BRICS offers a more equitable, balanced, and fair mechanism to deal with an international economic order. That's diplomatic language for "we're done with Western dominance." Tanzania's foreign minister has been actively building ties with Russia. They met on the sidelines of the second ministerial conference of the Russia-Africa Partnership Forum in Cairo in December 2025. They discussed stepping up trade and economic cooperation. They reaffirmed readiness to coordinate actions at the UN and other international platforms. Translation? Tanzania and Russia are now voting together at the UN. They're coordinating foreign policy. This is alliance building in real time. Now let's talk about why the West is absolutely terrified of this. First, Tanzania is strategically located. It's on the Indian Ocean coast. It's a member of the East African Community. It has access to landlocked countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, even the DRC. If Russia secures Tanzania as a reliable partner, they have a foothold in one of Africa's most important regions. They can project power across East Africa. They can challenge Western influence in Kenya, Uganda, everywhere. Second, Tanzania has resources: natural gas, gold, diamonds, agricultural potential, tourism. If Russia locks up access to these resources through favorable trade deals, that's resources the West can't access or control. In a world moving toward resource nationalism, losing Tanzania means losing access to critical supplies. Third, this sets a precedent. If Tanzania successfully pivots to Russia and maintains economic growth without Western aid, other African countries will take notes. Mali did it. Niger did it. Burkina Faso did it. Now Tanzania. If this trend continues, the entire Western aid and development model collapses. Countries realize they don't need Western lectures. They just need partners willing to do business without conditions. Fourth, the military angle. Russia is systematically building military relationships across Africa, training African officers, supplying weapons, offering security cooperation. If enough African countries align militarily with Russia, that changes the entire continental security architecture. Western military bases become less relevant. French and American influence wanes, and suddenly, African countries have options when disputes arise. And here's the really clever part of Russia's strategy. They're not asking Tanzania to choose. They're not demanding Tanzania cut ties with China or the West. They're just offering to be an additional partner, a backup option, a plan B. But that's exactly how influence works. Once Tanzania knows they have alternatives, Western leverage disappears. The West can't threaten aid cuts because Russia will step in. Can't threaten sanctions because local currency trade bypasses them. Can't threaten military isolation because Russia provides equipment and training. Now, let's be realistic about Russia's capabilities. Russia's economy is under massive sanctions because of Ukraine. Their GDP is smaller than Italy's. They're not as rich as China. They can't match Western aid dollar for dollar. But here's what Russia has that the West doesn't: willingness to ignore governance issues. Russia doesn't care if Tanzania's elections were fair, doesn't care about opposition arrests, doesn't care about press freedom. They care about trade, resources, and geopolitical positioning. For a country like Tanzania facing Western pressure, that's incredibly attractive. Plus, Russia has specific expertise Tanzania needs: energy development, agricultural technology, military equipment. These are areas where Russia is genuinely world-class. They're not just throwing money around, they're offering real technical cooperation that produces tangible results. And Russia is patient. They're not demanding immediate returns. They're building relationships that will pay off over decades. They're playing the long game while the West reacts emotionally to each election cycle. That patience gives Russia an edge in countries tired of Western short-term thinking. But there are risks for Tanzania in this strategy. First, overdependence on Russia creates new vulnerabilities. If Russia's economy tanks further, their ability to deliver on promises shrinks. Second, Western sanctions could extend to countries doing business with Russia. Tanzania could find itself caught between competing pressure campaigns. Third, Russia's track record in Africa is mixed. Projects get announced, some get built, others fade away. Tanzania needs to manage expectations carefully. However, for Tanzania right now, these risks are worth taking because the alternative is economic collapse. Without external financing, Tanzania can't fund infrastructure, can't import fertilizers, can't develop gas fields, can't achieve Vision 2050. The West abandoned them over election disputes. China is focused on bigger markets. Russia showed up with offers when nobody else would. That timing matters enormously. And here's what makes this moment so significant. Tanzania isn't a small country. It has 65 million people. It's East Africa's second largest economy after Kenya. It's a founding member of the East African Community. It has coastline, resources, and regional influence. If Russia successfully establishes Tanzania as a key partner, they gain a platform to expand influence across the entire region. Kenya is watching. Uganda is watching. Rwanda is watching. If Tanzania thrives with Russian support despite Western sanctions, those countries will ask why they should remain dependent on Western aid with all its conditions. The demonstration effect could be enormous. So what happens next? Russia and Tanzania have scheduled regular commission meetings. The next one is set for 2026. Russian companies are already on the ground exploring investments in fertilizer production, gas development, and infrastructure. Direct flights are being planned. Military cooperation is expanding. Trade in local currencies is increasing. All of this momentum builds on itself. Meanwhile, Western pressure continues. The EU hasn't restored the frozen aid. The US maintains its critical stance. Western media portrays Tanzania as sliding into authoritarianism. But these narratives don't change Tanzania's economic reality. They need partners who will actually invest. Russia is investing. The West is lecturing. The choice is obvious, and this pattern is repeating across Africa. Countries facing Western pressure are finding alternative partners: Russia, China, Gulf states, Turkey, all offering development without governance conditions. The West's monopoly on development financing is breaking down, and once that monopoly is gone, so is the leverage that came with it. Here's my take on where this goes. Tanzania and Russia will deepen cooperation significantly over the next few years. We'll see Russian investment in gas projects, fertilizer plants, and port infrastructure. We'll see increased military cooperation and coordination at international forums. Tanzania will use Russian support to offset Western aid cuts and maintain economic growth despite sanctions pressure. Other East African countries will watch closely. Some will follow Tanzania's lead and diversify away from Western dependence. Others will try to balance between East and West. But the era of unquestioned Western dominance in the region is over. Russia's move in Tanzania proved that alternatives exist and can work. The West will try to counter this with new aid packages and diplomatic engagement, but they'll face a credibility problem. They already pulled support once over political disputes. Why should Tanzania trust them not to do it again? Once you weaponize aid, it stops being aid and becomes leverage. And countries don't like being leveraged. So yeah, Russia's secret move to save Tanzania shocked the West, because it exposed how fragile Western influence actually is. One election dispute, one aid freeze, and decades of relationship building evaporate while Russia steps in with real support and no conditions. That's the new reality in Africa, and the West better figure out how to compete, because lectures about democracy aren't winning anymore. If you found this valuable, smash that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss future videos on the geopolitical shifts reshaping our world. And drop a comment: do you think Russia's strategy in Africa will succeed long-term, or will Western influence bounce back? I read every comment and want to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.